Please come home now, she's beating your mother. Janice Everett's voice cracked through the phone just as Korean mafia boss Choi Yi-hoon rose from a syndicate meeting, 12 of his own men watching him go still. He stopped mid-step. Every man behind him stopped too. Say that again. A crash echoed through the line. Then a muffled cry, his mother's voice choked and broken. Janice whispered, "She's in the foyer. Victoria has her tied to a chair. I saw her force her thumb onto some papers." Yi-hoon's expression went blank, unreadable. "Don't hang up." The line went dead. He turned to his driver. "Now," nobody asked why. Across the city, inside the Choi estate, Janice pounded against the grand foyer doors, locked from the inside. Through the gap she could see Yi-hoon's mother, 73 years old, left side paralyzed since her stroke, her voice reduced to a handful of broken syllables, bound to a wooden chair, a strip of fabric pulled tight over her mouth. Victoria Vance stood over her in a backless gold sequin gown, pressing an ink pad against the old woman's trembling thumb. "One signature," Victoria said softly, "and no one will ever question your competence again." The matriarch yanked her hand back. Victoria struck her across the face. Janice didn't wait for permission. She grabbed a brass candlestick from the hallway table and swung it into the lock. Wood splintered. She hit it again. The door gave way. Victoria turned, composed, unbothered, her dress spotless. But the older woman's cardigan was torn at the collar, and a red welt was already rising on her cheek. On the floor beside her sat a document titled Transfer of Fiduciary Control. Janice moved toward her. Victoria stepped between them. "This is a family matter. You don't belong in this room." "She can't lift her left arm past her waist," Janice said. "She didn't sign anything, you forced it." Victoria's eyes went cold. "Your staff. You don't get to have an opinion in this house." Janice looked down at the fresh ink smeared across the old woman's thumb. "That's not a signature. That's a forced print, and I can prove it." That's when the tapping started. One foot striking the marble floor, 3 heavy taps, 2 light, 3 heavy again. Janice froze. She'd heard that rhythm before, tapped quietly every time Yi-hoon left for a dangerous meeting. It wasn't panic. It was a message. Victoria's hand shot down to silence the old woman's foot. Janice stepped forward. "Let her finish." Victoria's smile turned to ice. "You called him, didn't you?" Janice said nothing. Victoria spotted the phone in her apron pocket and lunged. Janice tried to twist away, but Victoria seized a fistful of her hair and shoved her against the staircase railing. The phone skidded across the marble, screen still lit, the call still connected. "You have no idea what you just interrupted," Victoria hissed. If your blood is already boiling watching Victoria strike a defenseless stroke patient, drop justice in the comments right now, and let me know what city you're watching from before we go any further, because you are not going to believe what happens when Yi-hoon walks through that door. The engine roared as Yi-hoon's convoy tore through the gates. Prayer beads snapped in his fist as he sprinted up the marble steps 2 at a time. He shoved the foyer doors open and stopped cold. His mother gagged, bound, a mark rising on her face. Victoria, calm, composed, already speaking. "Yi-hoon, your maid attacked your mother. I tried to stop her." His mother's foot struck the floor 3 times, fast and deliberate. Janice met his eyes. "Look at her thumb," she said. "That ink isn't from a signature. It was forced." The beads slipped from Yi-hoon's hand and scattered across the marble, and for the first time in his life, the most feared man in the syndicate didn't know who to believe. He didn't answer her. Yi-hoon crossed the foyer in 4 strides and dropped to one knee in front of his mother's chair, his hands already working the rope at her wrists, and it was Victoria's voice that cut through the room like a blade dragged across silk. "Yi-hoon, listen to me. That woman put her hands on your mother before I could stop her. I was trying to protect her when you walked in." She said it smooth, unhurried, the kind of calm that only comes from rehearsal. 2 of the household's security men had already stepped toward Janice, one hand hovering near her elbow, waiting for the word to remove her. "Don't touch her." Yi-hoon didn't look up from the rope. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The 2 men stopped where they stood, and something in Victoria's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough that a woman who'd spent 6 years reading pain on unresponsive faces would catch it. Janice caught it. "Lock the doors," Yi-hoon said, still working the last knot free. "Nobody leaves this room until I understand what happened here." The gag came away from his mother's mouth first. She gasped, a small broken sound, and her eyes, sharp, wet, furious, found her son's face and held it. Yi-hoon's hands were shaking now, and Janice watched him notice it, watched him hate himself for it, watched him press his palm flat against his thigh to still it before anyone else could see. She understood that. She'd spent years watching families fall apart in hospital corridors, watching sons and daughters discover all at once how much time they'd already lost. "Mrs. Choi," Janice kept her voice low, steady, the same voice she used to use on Ward 4 when a patient's family was standing too close and panic was making the air too thin to breathe. "I need you to trust me for one more minute. Can you do that?" The old woman's eyes shifted to her, and something passed between them, not quite a nod, because her body still wouldn't fully obey her, but something. An agreement. "Yi-hoon," Victoria's voice again, sharper now, the smoothness fraying at the edges. "She is a domestic worker. Whatever theory she's about to feed you, ask yourself why a stroke patient's maid believes she understands your mother's condition better than a licensed physician does." "Because I do," Janice said, and she didn't raise her voice either, because raising your voice was for people who weren't sure of what they were saying. She turned to Yi-hoon's mother, knelt in front of her the way she used to kneel beside hospital beds, and rested 2 fingers lightly against the older woman's uninjured hand. "Mrs. Choi, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer with your foot the way you've been doing all morning. 1 heavy tap on the floor means yes. 2 light taps mean no. Can you show him?" For a moment, nothing happened. Yi-hoon watched his mother's face, and Janice saw the exact instant real fear crossed it. Not fear of Victoria, not fear of what had just happened to her, but fear of not being believed, of trying to speak and having no one hear it. Janice had seen that exact fear 100 times in 100 different faces, and every single time it had broken something loose in her chest that never quite went back into place. "Mrs. Choi," she said again, softer. "He came home, he's right here, show him." The old woman's foot lifted, trembling, and came down once against the marble. Hard, deliberate. "Ask her if she's in pain," Janice said quietly. Yi-hoon's throat worked before any sound came out of it. Are you hurting, Oma?" 2 light taps. Then, after a beat, 1 more, softer, almost embarrassed, as if to say a little, but that's not what matters right now. Something happened in Yi-hoon's face that Janice would carry with her long after this house had stopped being the most dangerous place she'd ever worked. 12 armed men had watched him walk out of a meeting without flinching. She doubted any of them had ever seen what she was watching now. A boy, buried somewhere inside a man built entirely out of consequence, realizing his mother had been trying to talk to him the whole time, and nobody had thought to listen. "Ask her about the document," Janice said. "Ask her if she signed it because she wanted to." Yi-hoon's hand found his mother's good one and held it like it was the only solid thing left in the room. "Uma, the papers on the floor. Did you want to sign them?" 2 taps, sharp, furious. Then, before anyone could speak, a 3rd, unprompted, 1 heavy tap, and her eyes cut toward Victoria with a clarity that made even the security men shift their weight. Victoria's composure didn't break completely. It cracked, 1 clean fracture, there and gone, a flash of something colder than performance crossing her face before the smile slid back into place. "This is absurd," she said, and for the first time her voice had an edge under the silk. "A stroke leaves cognitive damage, Yi-hoon. Everyone knows that she's confused, she's frightened, she doesn't understand what she's tapping. And this woman is manipulating a sick old lady into a performance to save her own job." "She's not confused." Janice stood, and she didn't raise her voice, but something in it made even Victoria go quiet for a beat. "I worked 6 years in a geriatric neurology ward. I've sat with dozens of patients exactly like her, full cognition, full understanding, trapped behind a body that won't cooperate anymore. She isn't confused, Mr. Choi. She's terrified of your fiancé, and she has been for longer than today." The room went very still. Because that was the question nobody had asked yet, not what happened this morning, but how long? How long had this been happening? How long had a woman who could not speak been finding small, desperate ways to say things nobody in her own house had thought to notice? Yi-hoon looked down at his mother's hand in his, at the ink still staining her thumb, and something new moved across his face, not the blank fury from the foyer, something quieter and worse. "How long?" he said, not really to anyone. "How long has this been happening under my own roof?" His mother's foot tapped again, 3 times, slow and heavy, and this time even Yi-hoon didn't need Janice to translate it. "Longer than you know. Someone in this house taught her how to hide her progress from you," Janice said quietly, watching his mother's eyes for confirmation and finding it. "Someone made sure the staff log said she couldn't communicate at all. Mrs. Choi has been fully aware this whole time, Mr. Choi. She's just been made to look like she wasn't. And I don't think Ms. Vance did that alone." Victoria's mouth opened, and for once, nothing smooth came out of it. And that was when the piano, untouched, empty of anyone's hands, let out a single low note. The sustained pedal, someone would later realize, still pressed down from that morning, finally releasing on its own, and every person in that foyer turned toward it like it was a voice from somewhere they couldn't see. If you felt something crack open in your own chest, watching a mother finally get heard by her son, drop, "I hear her," in the comments right now. We owe it to every woman who's ever been talked over in her own house to say it loud. And before we go any further, if stories like this one hit you somewhere real, I want to put something in front of you. There's a 2-novel collection waiting for you right now. Stories that make you feel something, one story that will break your heart, and one that will heal it right back. Love, loss, hope, the kind of journeys you don't forget after the last page. It comes with a free audiobook and future books included, and it's an instant download the moment you grab it. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments below. Tap it and it's in your hands in seconds. And if you're watching this on your TV right now, just grab your phone, open the camera, and scan the QR code on your screen. That's all it takes. Go get it and come back. No one moved until the note faded completely, and then the front door opened before anyone had a chance to make sense of what they'd just heard. Dr. Kenneth Ross walked in already talking, a leather medical bag in one hand and a rolling cart trailing behind him, pushed by one of the household aides. "I got here as fast as I could," he said, not quite looking at anyone directly, his eyes skating across the room and landing everywhere except on the rope marks still visible on Isabella Choi's wrists. "Victoria called me the moment it started. I understand there's been an episode." "An episode," Yi-hoon repeated, still on one knee beside his mother's chair. "Agitation. Confusion. It happens with severe dementia patients, Mr. Choi. I know it's frightening to witness, especially after everything." Ross was already unzipping the bag, already reaching for a prefilled syringe nestled in foam padding, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this exact motion 100 times before and never once been questioned. "A mild sedative will calm her down and let us get her somewhere safe to properly assess her." "She doesn't have dementia." Janice hadn't moved from where she stood near the piano, but her voice carried across the room clean and certain, the way it used to carry across a hospital floor at 3 a.m. when a resident was about to make a mistake that would follow him for the rest of his career. She just spelled out full sentences to her son using her foot. "Dementia patients don't do that, doctor. You know that better than I do." Ross's hand paused over the syringe. "With respect, I'm the one with a medical license in this room." "Then start acting like it," Janice said, and stepped toward the cart before anyone could stop her. "Don't touch that," Ross snapped, and for the first time his voice cracked out of its calm bedside register into something thinner, more frightened. But Yi-hoon was already rising to his feet, and the 2 security men who moments earlier had been ready to drag Janice out of the house now stood very still, watching their boss instead of watching her, waiting to see which way this was going to break. "Let her look," Yi-hoon said quietly. Janice lifted the clipboard hanging from the side of the cart, the daily medication log, a column of dates and times and a doctor's cramped signature running down the margin. She scanned it fast, the way she used to scan charts before a night shift, looking for the thing that didn't sit right before she even knew what she was looking for. And there it was, second from the bottom. 8:00 a.m. Lorazepam 1 mg, administered per standing order. K. Ross. She held the clipboard up to the light coming through the tall foyer windows, tilting it, and the ink along Ross's signature caught the light in a way that dried ink never does, a faint sheen, still slightly wet at the tail of the R. smearing under the pad of her thumb when she pressed it. "That's not possible," she said softly, and there was something almost gentle in how she said it, the way you deliver bad news to someone you didn't want to hurt but had to. "This says you administered a dose at 8 this morning. It's barely past noon. Ink dries in minutes, doctor, not hours, and this hasn't dried at all." The room seemed to tilt half a degree toward Ross. "I'd like to see that," Yi-hoon said, and it wasn't a request, and Janice handed him the clipboard, and he looked down at the smudge now blooming faintly across his own fingers where he'd touched the page, and something in his face went very quiet and very dangerous. "There's an explanation," Ross said quickly. "Charts get updated retroactively all the time. It's standard practice when—" "Where were you at 8 o'clock this morning?" Yi-hoon asked. Ross opened his mouth, and Janice watched the exact second his mind scrambled for an answer that would hold together, watched him settle on one a beat too late to sound natural. "Here. I was here, seeing to her morning medication, exactly as the chart states." "He wasn't." The voice came from the aide who'd wheeled in the cart, a young woman in the household uniform, standing near the doorway, who up until this moment had said nothing at all. She looked terrified the second the words left her mouth, like she already regretted them, but she kept going anyway, the way people do when the truth has been sitting in their chest so long it finally just falls out on its own. "I signed for a delivery from him at the front gate at 8:30. He was coming from town. I remember, because he asked me not to log it in the visitor book." "That's not true," Ross said too fast, too loud. "The chart says I gave her this dose at 8 a.m., Janice said slowly, reading it back like she was laying a card face up on a table. "But according to your own staff, you were at the market." Ross's face had gone the color of old paper. "This is a misunderstanding. I can explain the timeline once we're not standing in the middle of a domestic disturbance." "You can explain it now." Yi-hoon's voice hadn't risen, but every person in that room understood the temperature of it had changed completely. He set the clipboard down on the piano lid with a care that was somehow more frightening than if he'd slammed it, and he turned back toward the cart, toward the syringe still sitting in Ross's other hand. "Put that down." "Mr. Choi, your mother needs." "Touch that syringe to my mother again, doctor, and you won't leave this room." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Ross's hand opened almost involuntarily, and the syringe dropped back into its foam cradle with a small, harmless click that somehow landed in the silence like a gunshot. And in that silence, a new and quieter question moved through the room, one nobody said out loud but everybody seemed to feel at once. If Ross hadn't been here at 8 to administer that dose, and the ink was still wet now, at noon, then whoever had actually signed his name to that chart had done it recently, within the hour, which meant somebody in this house had been sitting somewhere close by, forging a doctor's signature, timing it to match a schedule that hadn't happened yet, and had only just finished before Yi-hoon walked through that door. Which meant the plan hadn't been rushed together in a panic that morning. It had been prepared, waiting, ready to go the moment it was needed. Victoria, who had gone very quiet since the piano note, glanced toward the hallway that led to the security office. Just a flicker, just a half-second, the kind of look a person gives when they're checking that something is still where they left it, and Janice caught it, filed it away without a word, because right now wasn't the moment. Isabella Choi's foot struck the marble floor again, hard, 3 times, her eyes fixed not on Ross or on Victoria, but on the small red light mounted above the grand piano, the same light that had blinked steadily all morning above the antique instruments restored recording unit, a quiet security feature Yi-hoon had installed himself 2 years earlier and mentioned to almost no one. Everyone in the room followed her gaze at once. And as they watched, the light flickered, dimmed, and went dark. The dark where that little red light used to be told Yi-hoon everything he needed to know. Somebody in his own house had just made a decision, and they'd made it in the last 30 seconds, which meant they were watching this room right now. He didn't say that out loud. He didn't have to. Janice saw it land in his face, saw the shift from grief to something colder and more useful, the look of a man converting fear into a plan because the alternative was standing still. He crouched in front of his mother again, his voice gentler than Janice had heard it yet, like he was trying to hand her something fragile without dropping it. "The papers. Where are the real ones? Where does father keep them?" His mother's eyes moved to the floor, then to the far hallway, then back to him, and her foot began again, not the simple yes-no rhythm from before, but something longer, more deliberate, a pattern Janice hadn't heard yet. One heavy tap. A pause. Too heavy. A pause. 3 light, fast, almost urgent. "She's not answering yes or no," Janice said, watching closely. "She's counting something." "The vault," Yi-hoon said quietly, and something in his voice had gone very far away, like he was standing in 2 moments at once, this one, and some old memory of being a boy shown a code by a father who was no longer alive to protect it. "That's the vault sequence. 1, 2, 3. He looked up at his mother. "You remember the code." Isabella's eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, fierce, present, nothing at all like a woman anyone in this room had described an hour ago as confused. She tapped again, slower this time, patient with him, patient with all of them, the way a mother is patient with a child finally catching up to something she'd known for years. "There," Yi-hoon breathed. "That's it, that's the sequence." Victoria's voice cut in from across the room, and for the first time since the piano note, it had lost every bit of its silk. "Yi-hoon, this is exactly the kind of paranoid spiral I was trying to prevent. Your mother is exhausted, she's frightened. She's giving you random taps and you're building a treasure map out of it." "The vault code was only known to 3 people," Yi-hoon said, not looking at her. "My father, my mother, and me." He stood, and his eyes found Victoria's for the first time since he'd walked back into this house. "One of them is dead, so who taught you to be so certain there's nothing down there worth finding?" Victoria didn't answer that. He turned to Janice instead, and something had settled in him, some old weight finally finding its footing. "Come with me. I want a witness who isn't blood and isn't staff on payroll to me." They went down together, past the kitchen, through a narrow service door disguised as a linen closet, down a flight of stone steps that grew colder with every turn, until they reached a reinforced door set into the mansion's original foundation, thick as a bank's, humming faintly with its own climate system. Yi-hoon punched the sequence his mother had given him into the keypad. Heavy, heavy, light, 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 and the outer door released with a heavy mechanical sigh. But the inner vault door, the one meant to require a second physical key and a hand seal kept in his father's old study, was already standing open. Yi-hoon went very still in the doorway. "That's not possible," he said. "This door hasn't been opened in 3 years." Janice looked past his shoulder into the vault. Rows of shelving, ledgers, deed boxes, the dull gleam of a small brass seal press bolted to a side table, its felt-lined case sitting open and empty beside it. "The seal's gone," Yi-hoon said. Somewhere behind them, soft-soled shoes moved on stone, unhurried, and Victoria's voice arrived a moment before she did, smooth again, rebuilt, like she'd had the whole staircase to compose herself back into the woman she wanted them to see. "I was down here earlier," she said, stepping into the vault light. "Securing the deeds. After everything with your mother this morning, I didn't want anything sensitive left unattended while the house was in chaos. I was protecting your family's interests, Yi-hoon, the way I always do." "Protecting them from what?" Yi-hoon's voice was very quiet now. The quiet Janice was starting to understand was more dangerous than his anger. "The vault's been sealed for 3 years. Nobody's touched it. And you're telling me the same morning my mother is beaten half to death over a signature, you just happened to come down here and open it yourself." "I have every right to access family assets," Victoria said. "I'm your fiancé." "Then why would you need the seal?" Janice said slowly, watching her. "If the papers upstairs were already legal, if Mrs. Choi's signature was real, if the transfer document was valid on its own, you wouldn't need the family seal at all. A signature's enough for a legal transfer. The seal's only worth something if you're trying to make something look older than it is, or make it look like it came from someone who never touched it." For one full second, nobody in the vault moved. Behind Victoria, mounted above the vault entrance, a bank of small security monitors flickered feeds from the driveway, the east wing, the wine cellar, and on the third screen down, just for an instant, something passed across the frame. Not a glitch. A shape. A shoulder, a sleeve, gone again before anyone could be certain they'd seen it at all. Janice's eyes cut toward it, and then back to Victoria fast enough that Victoria didn't notice. And a new, colder question settled into Janice's chest, one she didn't say out loud yet. If Victoria had been down here alone, securing papers, then who else had just walked past a hallway camera 30 feet from where they were standing? "You're building a story out of nothing," Victoria said, folding her arms, and it was that motion, small, unthinking, the kind of gesture a person makes 1,000 times a day without considering it, that dragged Janice's attention down to her wrist. A faint blue-black smear sat under 2 of Victoria's fingernails, dried into the creases of her cuticles, the exact shade of ink used in the family's antique stamp pad, the one that lived in a locked drawer in the study, the one that had no earthly reason to be anywhere near a woman who claimed she'd only come down here to lock papers away. "Mr. Choi," Janice's voice was low, steady, certain in the way a nurse's voice gets right before she tells a family the thing they've been afraid to hear. "Check her hands. That blue stamp pad ink, it's still under her nails." Yi-hoon turned, and for the first time since the foyer, Victoria took one small, involuntary step backward. And behind her, on the monitor bank, the same shifting shadow crossed a second camera feed. Closer now, moving with purpose, heading in a direction that Janice realized with a slow and sinking certainty led straight back up toward the room where Isabella Choi was sitting, alone, with no one but a rattled young aide and a doctor whose signature had just been proven a lie. "Someone's coming," Janice said, already moving, and Yi-hoon didn't waste breath asking who. He was through the vault door and taking the stone steps 2 at a time before she'd finished the sentence, leaving her alone for one long moment with Victoria and the open vault and whatever truth was still sitting in it, waiting to be found. Janice didn't chase him. She trusted him to get to his mother. Her job was down here. She turned back into the vault, scanning the shelving, the deed boxes, the empty seal case, and her eyes caught on the small mesh trash bin tucked beneath the side table, the kind used for shredded paper and broken office supplies, half hidden behind the seal press. Something dark and rectangular sat inside it, half buried under a scatter of shredded documents, its screen spiderwebbed with a single hard crack across the glass. A tablet. She knelt and lifted it out carefully, the way she used to lift fragile things out of hospital drawers, and turned it over in her hands. The screen was cracked but not dead. A thin sliver of light still pulsed faintly along one edge when she pressed the side button. "That's not yours to touch," Victoria said behind her, and for the first time, there was something underneath the ice in her voice that sounded almost like fear. "Then it shouldn't have been thrown away," Janice said, and didn't look up. The device woke slowly, reluctantly, the cracked glass scattering the light into jagged little fractures across a lock screen with no password set. The kind of oversight a person makes when they're in a hurry to destroy something, not protect it. Janice's thumb found the gallery app on instinct, the same way her hands used to find a patient's chart without her eyes needing to search for it, and a row of video thumbnails filled the shattered screen. They were dated, recent, the most recent one 3 days old. She pressed play on the oldest file first. The video opened on a room Janice recognized immediately, the small sitting parlor off the east wing, empty of furniture except a single chair positioned in front of a folding privacy screen, lit by 2 portable lamps angled like something out of a television studio. Victoria sat in the chair in a robe, hair pulled back, no makeup, nothing like the polished woman standing 3 feet away from Janice right now, and she was talking to someone off camera, her voice flat, businesslike, rehearsing. "Say it again," a man's voice said from behind the camera, muffled, familiar in a way Janice couldn't place yet. "Slower this time. Make it sound like you're scared, not like you're reading it." And on screen, Victoria took a breath, arranged her face into something soft and frightened, and said, in a voice that cracked exactly on cue, "Yi-hoon, your maid attacked your mother. I tried to stop her." The exact words, the exact inflection. The same tremor she'd used in the foyer not 3 hours ago, rehearsed days in advance in an empty room with a man Janice couldn't yet see. Janice's stomach turned over slow and cold. She didn't just plan this today, she said quietly, almost to herself, the cracked screen trembling slightly in her hands. She's been filming these setups for weeks. Victoria's face had gone very still. Turn that off. Janice didn't. She swiped to the next file instead, and this one was shorter, shakier, clearly filmed in secret from inside a pocket or a bag, the angle low and tilted, aimed across a kitchen counter where a row of small prescription bottles sat lined up beside an unmarked box of medication blister packs. A gloved hand entered the frame, prying open a factory-sealed blister pack with careful, practiced fingers, replacing one row of pills with another, resealing it so smoothly Janice would never have caught the tampering with her eyes alone, only with the years of training that taught her exactly where a real seal ends and a false one begins. Make sure the color's a close match, Victoria's voice said from off-screen, closer to this camera than the last one. If her doctor notices a shade difference, we lose everything. I know what I'm doing, the same male voice answered, low, tired, resentful in a way that struck Janice as different from Victoria's cold precision, like a man who hated what his hands were doing even while they kept doing it. Janice pressed pause and looked up at Victoria, who hadn't moved, whose composure had finally, fully abandoned her, replaced by something rower and less rehearsed. Who's holding the camera, Victoria? I don't know what you think you're looking at, Victoria said, but her voice had lost its silk entirely now, thin and quick. Janice pressed play on the last video in the folder, dated that same morning, time-stamped less than 2 hours before Janice had made her frantic call to Yi-hoon. The angle was different again, a hallway mirror this time, catching a reflection at a strange sideways slant, Victoria's back to the camera as she adjusted her gold dress in the glass, checking her reflection with the calm of a woman preparing for a performance rather than a crisis. And behind her, caught for just an instant in the mirror's edge before the recording cut off, stood a second figure, half in shadow, dressed not in a guard's uniform but in the black-and-white formal wear of the household staff. A face Janice couldn't quite place from the angle, but a posture she'd walked past in these halls 100 times without a second glance. Look at the reflection in the glass, Janice said slowly, feeling something cold settle into her chest. That isn't a guard. Footsteps hit the stone stairs above them, fast, and Yi-hoon reappeared in the vault doorway, breathing hard. His mother's welfare clearly confirmed enough that he'd come straight back down rather than staying at her side, which told Janice everything about how urgently he needed to know what she'd found. Press play on the last file, Janice, he said, though he hadn't seen it yet. He'd simply read it in her face, in the stillness that had come over her, the particular quiet of someone who has just watched a stranger's calculated cruelty laid bare frame by frame. She turned the cracked screen toward him instead, and let him see it for himself, the rehearsal, the tampered medication, and finally the reflection in the hallway mirror, the shadow of a household staff member standing close enough behind Victoria to be a partner and not a bystander. Yi-hoon's jaw tightened as the video ended, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, staring at the frozen frame, at the blurred edge of a face he almost recognized and couldn't quite place yet, and something in his stillness frightened Janice more than his anger ever could. There's more, he said finally, and his voice had dropped into something low and grim. I checked the master security panel on my way back down. Someone used a level 3 override to kill that piano camera feed upstairs. There are only 2 active level 3 credentials in this entire estate. Mine. He looked at the cracked tablet in Janice's hands, at the shadow still frozen in the mirror's reflection, and something behind his eyes went cold and final. And one I gave, personally, years ago, to a man I trusted with my mother's life. Somewhere above them, faint but unmistakable through the stone and the old pipework of the house, a door closed, not slammed, not forced, just quietly, deliberately shut, the sound of someone making sure they wouldn't be interrupted. If watching Victoria calmly rehearse her lies while an insider helped her poison an old woman's medicine makes your blood boil the way it made mine, smash that like button right now. Every hard-working woman who's ever been treated like she doesn't matter in a house she keeps running deserves someone standing up for her. And today, that's us. That closed door turned out to be the front entrance of the estate, and by the time Yi-hoon and Janice reached the top of the vault stairs, it was already too late to stop what was walking through it. Two uniformed police officers stood in the grand foyer, flanking a man in a gray transport coordinator's jacket who held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. And behind them, parked crooked across the circular drive where a wedding photographer might once have set up a shot, sat an unmarked medical transport van with its rear doors already open. A gurney waited beside it, straps hanging loose, ready. "Mr. Choi." The taller of the two officers stepped forward first, and there was something too smooth in the way he said it, the practiced courtesy of a man who already knew how this was supposed to end and was simply going through the motions of pretending otherwise. "We have an emergency petition here, filed this morning, requesting immediate medical evaluation and transport for your mother. Given the reported instability in the household, we're required to act on it without delay." "Filed by whom?" Yi-hoon said, though Janice could see in his face that he already knew the answer before the officer opened the folder. "Ms. Victoria Vance," the officer said, "as next of kin pending marriage and listed emergency contact on file with Dr. Ross's office." Victoria had come down from wherever she'd been in the minutes, since the vault, composed again, that terrible calm settled back over her like a coat she'd simply put back on. And she stood near the base of the staircase now with her arms folded. Watching this unfold the way a woman watches a hand of cards, she'd stacked herself finally come up in her favor. "This is for her own protection, Yi-hoon," she said softly, almost gently, as if she were the only reasonable person left in the room. "You saw her this morning. Confused, agitated, striking out. It's not safe for her to remain in a home where she's clearly at risk of further episodes." "She wasn't agitated," Janice said. "She was tied to a chair." The transport coordinator flipped open his clipboard without looking up. "Ma'am, I understand emotions are running high, but I'll need everyone to step back so my team can prepare the patient for transfer." Isabella Choi had been brought to sit near the piano in the interim, wrapped now in a blanket someone had thoughtfully draped over her shoulders. And at the coordinator's words, her good hand tightened in the fabric, her eyes going wide and fixed on her son with an expression that needed no foot tapping at all to translate. Janice had seen that look before, too, on faces in hospital hallways when a transfer order came through that nobody in the room actually wanted, when the paperwork moved faster than anyone's ability to stop it, when a frightened old woman became, in the space of a single signature, a case number instead of a person. "You're not taking her anywhere," Yi-hoon said, and he moved to stand between the gurney and his mother's chair without seeming to decide to do it, the way a body moves before the mind finishes catching up. "Sir, I understand this is distressing," the coordinator said, in the flat, rehearsed voice of a man who said that sentence several times a week and had stopped hearing himself say it. "But this is a legally filed emergency petition, and interference with an authorized medical transport is a criminal offense." "Show it to me," Janice said. The coordinator glanced at her the way people sometimes glanced at staff in this house, a quick dismissive sweep that catalogued the apron, decided she didn't matter, and moved on. "This isn't really." "Show it to me," Janice said again, and something in her voice made even the officers pause. "Or explain to a judge later why you refuse to let a witness verify the document you're using to remove a woman from her own home." The coordinator's jaw tightened, but he held the clipboard out, and Janice took it with hands that had gone very steady, the same steadiness she used to find in the middle of a code blue when everyone else in the room was moving too fast to read anything clearly. She scanned past the header, past the notarized filing stamp, past Victoria's neat signature at the bottom, down through paragraph after paragraph of dense legal language, until her eyes caught on a clause near the bottom of the second page, printed in the same small font as everything around it, easy to miss if you weren't looking for exactly this kind of thing. She read it twice to be sure. "There's a mandatory clause here," she said slowly, and something in her chest had gone tight and electric, the particular feeling of finding a foothold on a wall you'd thought was smooth all the way down. "It says any emergency capacity petition of this kind requires a recorded capacity evaluation. conducted by an independent physician, completed within 2 hours of the petition's filing time, before any permanent transfer to a secure facility can legally proceed. That's a standard formality, the coordinator said, too quickly. It doesn't affect today's transport. It affects today's transport specifically, Janice said, because your filing time is stamped right here at 9:40 this morning. It's now past noon, which means your 2-hour window already closed before you walked through that door, unless the evaluation already happened. Did it happen? Silence. You have a warrant, officer, Janice said, turning to the 2 policemen now, but this clause overrides your transport order. If there's no recorded evaluation on file within that window, this petition isn't valid for immediate transfer. It's void. That's not how this works, the transport coordinator said, but his eyes had cut toward Victoria for half a second, the way a man looks at someone when he's checking whether he's allowed to keep bluffing. It's exactly how it works, Janice said. I spent 6 years reading exactly this kind of language on exactly this kind of form. This clause exists because people get railroaded into these transfers before anyone independent ever lays eyes on them. It's there to protect people like her. She nodded toward Isabella, whose grip on the blanket had loosened slightly, watching this exchange with an intensity that made it clear she understood every word, even if her body still couldn't move fast enough to join it. And if you sedate her now, Janice went on, looking directly at Dr. Ross, who had gone very quiet near the doorway since his earlier humiliation. Before that evaluation happens, before it's recorded, the entire petition becomes legally void. You'll have taken an unevaluated woman off her own property on a filing that never met its own conditions. That's not a medical transport at that point. That's a kidnapping with paperwork. The word landed hard in the room, and one of the officers shifted his weight, glancing toward his partner with the particular discomfort of a man realizing the ground under a job he'd been told was routine had just gotten a great deal less solid. Victoria's calm cracked at the edges again, faster this time, the mask slipping in a way it hadn't since the vault. She stepped toward the transport team, close enough that Janice couldn't hear every word, and lowered her voice to something meant only for them. A single, quiet instruction, delivered with the flat authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Janice didn't catch the words, but she caught the coordinator's face change in response, the small tightening around his eyes, the way his hand drifted toward the radio clipped at his shoulder. We'll proceed with transport regardless, the coordinator said, louder now, performing certainty he didn't quite have anymore. The clause is a documentation issue. It doesn't prevent transport itself, only certain classifications of it. We'll sort the paperwork out at the facility. Which facility? Yi-hoon said. The coordinator hesitated. A private evaluation center, fully licensed. Name it. I don't have the authority to disclose. Then I'll find out myself. Yi-hoon's phone was already in his hand, and Janice watched him pull up something, a tracking application, private. The kind of software that existed on the phone of a man who had learned a long time ago never to trust a vehicle he didn't watch himself, and he angled the screen so Janice could see it too. A small blinking marker sat over the estate's driveway, representing the transport van parked just outside, its destination address already logged into the vehicle's onboard system the moment it had been dispatched. Janice leaned in and read it, and something cold settled into her stomach. That's not the public hospital, she said quietly. That's not even in the same direction. Look at the ambulance tracking log, Yi-hoon said, turning the screen so the officers could see it too. It's not heading to the public hospital. It's routed to an address 40 minutes outside the city, off the main road, registered under a private holding company. Whose facility is that? Nobody answered. Dr. Ross's eyes had gone somewhere very far away, and Janice recognized the look now. The particular blankness of a man realizing the lie he'd agreed to tell was bigger than the one he'd been told he was telling. I want a name on that facility, Yi-hoon said, and his voice had dropped into the register Janice had learned by now to recognize as the most dangerous one he had, not loud, not desperate, just absolutely, coldly certain. And I want the 2-hour evaluation clause honored to the letter, in front of these officers on record, before anyone touches my mother again. If that clause isn't met, this petition is void. And if that van moves 1 inch off this property without it, every man standing in this foyer is complicit in exactly what she just called it. The taller officer looked at his partner. His partner looked at the coordinator. The coordinator looked, finally and unmistakably, toward Victoria, waiting, Janice realized with a slow chill, for permission to keep going, as though the badge on his chest answered to her instructions rather than to the law printed on the very paper he was holding. Victoria's mouth opened to speak. And that was the moment the front doors, still standing open from the transport team's arrival, let in a gust of wind sharp enough to send a stack of loose papers on the entry table sliding to the floor, scattering across the marble in a wide fan, dozens of pages, and among them, catching the light at just the right angle, a document none of them had seen before, one that had clearly fallen out of someone's folder in the confusion, its header visible even from across the room. A second petition, filed under a different case number, dated 3 weeks earlier, bearing Victoria's signature and a facility name that matched exactly the coordinates now blinking on Yi-hoon's phone. If you're the kind of woman who's had to fight a system built to move faster than the people it's supposed to protect, you know exactly what it feels like to watch a piece of paper try to erase somebody. Stay with this story, because Isabella's fight isn't over yet. And while you're waiting on the next chapter, I want to put something else in front of you, something for the nights when you need a different kind of story, one that reminds you what it feels like to be truly seen and truly loved. It's called Stories That Make You Feel Something, a 2-novel collection, one story that will break your heart wide open, and one that will heal it right back up. Love, loss, hope, the kind of journeys you carry with you long after the last page. It comes with a free audiobook, future books included, and it's an instant download the second you grab it. No waiting, no shipping, just yours tonight. The link is in the description and pinned right there in the comments. And if you're watching this on your TV, just pick up your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on your screen. That's all it takes. Go get it for yourself, then come on back, because what is coming next is where the walls really start closing in. Yi-hoon was already on one knee gathering the scattered pages before anyone else in the room had finished processing what they were looking at. And the moment his fingers closed around that second petition, dated 3 weeks ago, filed under a case number none of them had heard until this second, everything about the last hour rearranged itself in his mind into something far worse than a morning's panic. 3 weeks, he said, reading the date twice like it might change if he looked hard enough. This wasn't drawn up today. This was filed and sitting ready before my mother ever raised her hand to that piano. Yi-hoon, Victoria started, but whatever explanation she'd been building collapsed the moment she saw which document he was holding. Her face didn't go pale so much as it went still, the particular stillness of a woman watching a structure she'd spent months constructing come apart floor by floor in front of a room full of witnesses. Outside, through the still-open front doors, the transport van's engine turned over. "They're moving," one of the officers said, already stepping toward the drive, and Janice's stomach dropped as she watched through the window, the gurney, empty now, being folded back into the van, and past it, through the tinted rear glass, the small shape of Isabella Choi already strapped in, taken while every eye in that foyer had been fixed on a piece of paper on the floor. "When did they load her?" Yi-hoon's voice cracked through the room like a whip, and the transport coordinator, caught somewhere between his instructions and the wreckage of his own paperwork, didn't answer fast enough. Yi-hoon was already moving, out the door, down the front steps 2 at a time, Janice close behind him, her heart slamming against her ribs the way it used to when a code got called and the numbers on the monitor stopped making sense. The van was already rolling down the long gravel drive toward the gates. "Call ahead," Yi-hoon shouted to no one and everyone, already sprinting for his own car, and Janice threw herself into the passenger seat a half-second before he peeled out after it, gravel spitting from beneath the tires, the estate's iron gates looming up fast at the end of the drive, standing open, unguarded, except for one figure standing just inside them, phone pressed to his ear, half turned away. so absorbed in whatever he was saying that he didn't register the car bearing down on him until it was almost too late. Minho. 14 years the man had run this household. 14 years of quiet competence, of remembering how Yi-hoon's mother liked her tea before her stroke ever took the words for it from her, of standing at the edge of 100 family dinners with the particular invisible dignity of a man who'd made himself essential by making himself unnoticed. Yi-hoon had eaten breakfast across from that man more mornings than he could count. Had trusted him with keys to rooms he didn't even trust his own security detail with. Yi-hoon was out of the car before it had fully stopped, and Minho spun at the sound, phone dropping from his hand, his face doing something complicated and terrible. Not surprise exactly, because part of him had clearly known this moment was coming, but something closer to relief, the strange relief of a man finally caught after holding a secret too heavy to carry alone. "Where is she going?" Yi-hoon said. No greeting, no accusation yet, just the question, flat and immediate. Minho's mouth opened, and nothing came out. Yi-hoon crossed the gravel and bent down, picking up the phone Minho had dropped. Not his household phone, Yi-hoon realized immediately, not the one with the family's number saved in it, but a second device, cheap, prepaid, the screen still lit with a text thread open. He read it fast, and Janice, coming up beside him, read it over his shoulder. "Reroute confirmed. Facility C, do not let the van deviate. Sent 9 minutes ago, from a number saved only as V." "You did this." Yi-hoon's voice had dropped into something low and shaking, a register Janice hadn't heard from him yet, not even in the vault, not even over the syringe. 14 years you ate at my table, Minho. 14 years you carried my mother's tea tray up those stairs every morning she couldn't manage it herself. And you did this." Minho's composure, whatever thin version of it he'd been holding onto, finally broke completely. "You don't understand what she had on me," he said, and his voice cracked on the words, an old man's voice suddenly, though he wasn't old at all, just worn down in a way that showed now that the mask was gone. "The debts, Yi-hoon, 200,000. Maybe more. I stopped counting because counting made it worse. The men I owe don't send lawyers, they send people who hurt families, and I have a daughter." "So you sold mine," Yi-hoon said. "She promised me the ports would be clean under a new holding company," Minho said, the words tumbling out now like a dam had finally given, like he'd been holding this confession behind his teeth for weeks, and it had simply worn through. "She said nobody would get hurt, that your mother would just be moved somewhere comfortable, evaluated, that it was a business restructuring, not this. Not what happened this morning." "I didn't know she'd actually put her hands on her, Yi-hoon, I swear to you. I thought it was papers, just papers." "You disabled the cameras," Janice said quietly, and Minho's eyes cut to her, startled, as if he'd forgotten she was standing there at all. "The piano feed, the East Wing. You gave Victoria the override code." Minho's silence was answer enough. "How much did she pay you?" Yi-hoon said. "To make my mother invisible in her own house." "It was never about the money after the first payment," Minho said, and something in his face, for just a moment, looked genuinely broken, genuinely human, a man who had made a choice weeks ago that he could no longer see any way back from. "It became about not being able to stop. Once you give someone like her a key, Yi-hoon, she doesn't let you take it back. She has recordings. She has proof I falsified logs. If I'd gone to you, she would have destroyed me, and my daughter would have grown up visiting me in a place worse than any debt collector's basement." The radio clipped to Minho's belt, a household security channel Yi-hoon hadn't even noticed he still had access to, crackled suddenly to life, and a voice came through it, flat, unhurried, chillingly calm, a voice Janice recognized immediately as belonging to one of the transport team's security escorts. "She's asking about the maid. Says if the maid tries to follow, we're authorized to handle it. Dispose of her if she gets in the way." The words landed in the gravel drive like something physical, and Yi-hoon's head snapped toward Janice, and for one terrible second Janice watched real fear cross his face. Not for himself, not even for his mother in that instant, but for her, standing there in her apron on a stretch of gravel outside a locked estate gate, having become, in the space of one radio transmission, a liability. Someone had just been given permission to eliminate. "Get in the car," Yi-hoon said. "Not without you," Janice said, and there wasn't room in her voice for argument. Yi-hoon turned back to Min-ho, and something in him seemed to decide all at once that there wasn't time left to spend on rage, that rage was a luxury for men who had hours instead of minutes. "The van's route. Where is it now?" "Exactly." Min-ho, shaking, pulled up the tracking app still open on the burner phone. The one that had been feeding him updates the whole time so he could confirm the reroute was holding. A small blinking dot sat on a private access road, moving steadily away from the city, away from any hospital that would have proper oversight, proper witnesses, proper law. "The clinic's 20 minutes out at highway speed," Min-ho said. "But they'll have her inside before you're even close if you don't." "How long until they get her behind evaluation doors?" Yi-hoon said. "Locked doors, ones I can't walk through without another warrant." Min-ho looked at the time stamp, did the math with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and something in his face went gray. 12 minutes, he said. "Maybe less. Once she's inside intake, they can start the sedation protocol whether the clause was honored or not. Nobody's going to stop them from the inside." 12 minutes. Janice thought of Isabella Choi's foot striking that marble floor. 3 heavy taps. A woman who had spent months being treated as though her mind had left her body when it had never left at all. Now strapped alone in the back of a van headed somewhere with no one beside her who understood what her silence actually meant. And underneath the fear, a small, cold, unanswered question surfaced in Janice's mind, one she didn't say out loud yet because there wasn't time. If Victoria had planned this 3 weeks in advance, filed a second petition, built a facility relationship, turned a 14-year loyal butler into an informant, then whatever was waiting at that clinic wasn't improvised either. Someone there was already expecting them. Someone there already knew exactly how this was supposed to end. "Get him in the car," Yi-hoon said to his driver, nodding at Min-ho, his voice flat now, all the fury folded down into something colder and more useful, the voice of a man converting grief into velocity because there was no time left to feel it properly. "He's the only one who knows that facility's layout." Min-ho didn't resist. He climbed into the back seat like a man walking toward whatever judgment was waiting for him on the other side of this, and Yi-hoon slid behind the wheel, and Janice barely had her door shut before the car surged forward through the open gates and out onto the main road, the city thinning fast into open highway, the blinking dot on Min-ho's cracked phone screen the only thing standing between them and whatever waited at the end of it. 12 minutes, Yi-hoon said, eyes fixed hard on the road, knuckles white on the wheel. "We have 12 minutes before they get her behind those clinic doors." Janice looked at the clock on the dashboard, watched the first minute already slipping away, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that would make the car go any faster than it already was. If Janice's courage is putting a lump in your throat right now, a woman who could have stayed silent, stayed safe, and chose instead to run straight into danger for a family that wasn't even hers, drop a heart in the comments. She deserves every bit of love we can send her. 9 minutes disappeared somewhere between the highway on-ramp and the moment Min-ho leaned forward from the back seat and pointed at a low, unmarked building set back from the road behind a wall of manicured hedges. Its signs small and discreet, the kind of place built specifically to be missed by anyone not already looking for it. "That's it," he said. "Private entrance. There's a service road around back, past the loading dock. It's not on the main security loop. They never bothered wiring it because nobody's supposed to know it exists." Yi-hoon didn't slow down so much as he redirected the car's speed, cutting the wheel hard onto a narrow gravel access road, half swallowed by overgrown brush. The kind of route only someone who'd once helped smuggle deliveries in and out of this exact building would know existed. Janice braced a hand against the dashboard and kept her eyes on the building growing larger through the windshield, running through everything she knew about facilities like this one. The layout of private clinics built for exactly this kind of quiet, deniable work. The kind of place where hallways were built wide enough for gurneys and narrow enough to control who saw what. "Service entrances in places like this lead straight to the sterile corridor," she said, already moving before the car had fully stopped. which means the examination rooms are close, probably right off it. If they're rushing an evaluation, they won't waste time walking her across the building. Look for the shortest hallway. They abandoned the car in the loading dock's shadow, Minho trailing behind them without needing to be told to keep up. And Janice found the service door exactly where a woman who'd once worked hospital corridors for 6 years would expect to find it, propped, as service doors always were, by someone too rushed to let it lock behind them. Inside, the air changed immediately, that particular sterile hush of a place built to swallow sound, fluorescent light humming overhead, and from somewhere down the corridor to their left, a voice Janice recognized instantly. Dr. Ross, strained, talking fast, the cadence of a man being pushed to move faster than his conscience wanted to let him. They ran. The corridor spat them out into a small observation alcove outside a glass-paneled examination room, and through it, Janice's whole body went cold at once. Isabella Choi lay on an exam table, wrists and ankles secured with soft restraints, her blanket gone, replaced by a thin hospital gown, her eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling in the particular stillness of a woman conserving every ounce of strength for the fight still ahead of her. Victoria stood beside the table, no longer performing calm, no longer performing anything at all. Her composure had finally, fully abandoned her, replaced by something raw and cornered and dangerous. And in her gloved hand she held a loaded syringe, its needle hovering less than an inch above the thin, bruised skin of Isabella's forearm. Victoria, Yi-hoon's voice cracked through the glass door as he shoved it open, and every person inside the room froze at once. Step away from her. You're too late, Victoria said, and her voice had none of its silk left in it, just something thin and desperate and furious all at once. The evaluation clock ran out 11 minutes ago. This is a lawful sedation now, Yi-hoon, whether you like it or not. The second this goes into her system, this entire situation becomes a medical matter, not a legal one, and there's nothing you or your maid or anyone else in this building can do about it. One step closer, Victoria said, her hand tightening on the plunger, and I depress this completely. You know what's in this syringe. You know what it'll do to a woman her age, her condition. Is that a risk you're willing to take, Yi-hoon? Right here, right now, in front of everyone. Yi-hoon stopped where he stood, every muscle in his body coiled and useless, because she was right. And they both knew it. One wrong movement, one desperate lunge, and Victoria's thumb would finish what her plan had been building toward since the beginning, and there would be no undoing it. Dr. Ross, Yi-hoon's voice shook now, the first real crack Janice had heard in it since the foyer. You know what's in that syringe. You know what it does to a woman with her cardiac history. Stop her. Ross stood frozen near the monitoring equipment, his face gray, caught between two forms of ruin, and said nothing at all. Janice's mind was moving faster than her fear, cataloging the room the way she used to catalog a crashing patient's vitals. The equipment, the exits, the small details nobody else in this room had training enough to notice. And her eyes landed on a fixture mounted high in the ceiling's far corner. A small blue LED, steady, unmistakable, exactly the kind of indicator light she'd seen 100 times in hospital compliance rooms. Look up at the ceiling corner, Victoria, she said, and something in her own voice surprised her, steady, almost gentle, the way she used to speak to families about to hear something that would change everything. The blue light is blinking. Victoria's eyes flicked upward despite herself, a reflex she couldn't quite suppress, and for just a moment the syringe wavered a fraction of an inch off Isabella's skin. You forgot that state law requires medical capacity assessments to be broadcast live to the court. Serve the moment a formal petition triggers evaluation protocol, Janice said. Every clinic licensed to perform court-ordered evaluations has to have that feed active and unbroken, or the license gets pulled the same day. That light's not decoration, Victoria. That's a live camera. Everything you've said in this room in the last 2 minutes, the sedation, the threat, all of it is already sitting on a judge's server right now, time-stamped, unedited. For the first time since the vault, Victoria's face went completely white. That's not, her voice cracked, high and thin, the mask coming apart in real time now, in front of the very lens she hadn't known was watching her. That's a bluff. There's no way you'd know that unless. I told you I spent 6 years reading exactly this kind of language, Janice said. This is the part of the job nobody glamorizes, reading fine print until you know it better than the lawyers who wrote it. And into that fraction of a second, Victoria's attention split between the blinking light above her and the woman standing calm and certain in the doorway. Her grip on the syringe loosened just enough. Janice moved. She didn't think about it, didn't calculate it the way she'd calculated everything else in this house today. Her body simply remembered, in that instant, every year of holding down combative patients in crisis, every reflex trained into her hands long before this morning ever began, and she crossed the small room in 2 strides and drove her shoulder into Victoria's side, knocking her sideways and off balance, both of them crashing together into the thin privacy curtain hanging beside the exam table, the fabric tearing free of half its rings as they went down in a tangle. The syringe flew from Victoria's hand and hit the tile with a small, sharp, almost delicate sound, rolling once, twice, coming to rest harmlessly against the leg of a supply cart, its contents still sealed inside, still untouched, still exactly what it had always been. A threat that had finally, completely, lost its power the moment it left her hand. For one long, ringing second, nobody in the room moved. Then Yi-hoon was at his mother's side, hands shaking as he worked the restraints loose, his mother's good hand finding his wrist and gripping it with a strength that surprised him, tears finally breaking free down a face that had held itself so carefully still all morning. Min-ho stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the tangled curtain, at Victoria pinned beneath Janice's forearm, at the syringe lying harmless on the tile, and something in his expression looked almost like relief, the relief of a man watching someone else finally stop the thing he'd never had the courage to stop himself. Dr. Ross had backed all the way against the far wall, hands raised slightly, as if putting distance between himself and this room might somehow retroactively remove him from every choice he'd already made inside it. Victoria, beneath Janice's arm, wasn't struggling anymore. She'd gone strangely still, staring up at the blinking blue light in the corner with an expression Janice hadn't seen on her yet, not fury, not fear exactly, but the particular blankness of a person watching every version of the future she'd planned collapse into a single, unrecoverable moment, broadcast live, unedited, to a judge who would see all of it. "Get off me," Victoria said, but there was no command left in it at all, just breath. Janice didn't move, not yet. And somewhere down the corridor, faint at first and then unmistakably closer, came the sound of footsteps, several sets, moving fast, and a voice, flat, official, unfamiliar, calling out through a radio that this facility's live feed had just triggered an automatic compliance alert, and that a court monitoring unit was already 14 minutes out. No child, no elder, no woman like Isabella should ever have to fight this hard just to be believed in her own body. If you agree that no one should ever be allowed to abuse someone vulnerable and get away with it, drop your city and your local time in the comments right now. Let's fill this thread with every corner of the world that stands with her tonight. 14 minutes turned out to be closer to 6, because the first officer through the door wasn't local police at all but a court compliance officer, badge already out, eyes going straight to the blinking blue light in the ceiling corner as if it were the only thing in the room that mattered, which, Janice understood now, it was. "This room is under active judicial monitoring," the officer said, stepping past Yi-hoon without waiting for permission, his partner close behind him, both of them moving with the brisk efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this kind of scene and had simply never expected to walk into the middle of one already this far along. "Everyone stay where you are. Whatever's said in this room right now is being recorded to the court's server in real time." Janice let go of Victoria and stepped back, giving the officers room, but she didn't step far. Not yet. There was one more thing this room needed before it was finished, and she was the only person in it who knew how to make it happen. "Officer," she kept her voice level, the way she used to when she needed a room full of frightened people to actually hear her instead of just her noise. "Mrs. Choi is fully coherent. She's nonverbal since her stroke, but she communicates clearly through a tap system. I need 2 minutes to ask her some direct questions on record while your feed is still live. This is the only chance she may get to speak for herself before anyone tries to say she can't." The officer glanced at his partner, then at Isabella, propped now against the raised head of the exam table, blanket pulled back over her shoulders by Yi-hoon's shaking hands, her eyes clear and sharp, and fixed on Janice with an intensity that needed no translation at all. 2 minutes, the officer said. Go. Janice moved fast. There was a small dry erase board mounted near the supply cart, the kind clinics used for shift notes, and she wiped it clean with her sleeve and drew 2 columns on it in thick marker. Yes on one side, no on the other, a heavy line beneath each, and propped it against the bed rail where Isabella could see it clearly. "Mrs. Choi." Janice knelt beside the table, her voice gentle but unmistakably clear, pitched for the microphone she now understood was somewhere in that ceiling fixture too. "I'm going to ask you some questions. Tap once for yes, twice for no. Everyone here can hear you. Everyone watching this feed can hear you. Are you ready?" 1 tap, firm, unhesitating. "Did Victoria Vance strike you this morning in your home?" 1 tap. "Did she force your hand onto the transfer document against your will?" 1 tap, harder this time, her whole hand trembling with the effort of pressing it down. "Did she instruct Dr. Ross to sedate you without your consent, using medication logs that were forged?" 1 tap. The room had gone completely still. Even Victoria, still sitting where Janice had left her, propped against the base of the supply cart, had stopped moving entirely, her eyes fixed on the old woman's foot like she couldn't quite believe what she was watching, though she'd had months to prepare for exactly this possibility and had simply refused to believe it could ever actually happen. "Mrs. Choi," Yi-hoon's voice came now, rough, uneven, kneeling on the other side of the bed, his hand wrapped around his mother's good one. "Did anyone in our own household help her do this to you?" 1 tap. Then, unprompted, a second, deliberate this time, aimed unmistakably in the direction of the doorway where Minho still stood frozen, and the old butler's face crumpled entirely, all the composure of 14 years finally gone. The compliance officer stepped forward now, his own voice steady, formal, clearly aware of exactly what was being recorded and exactly how much it mattered. "Ms. Vance, you're being recorded on an active judicial feed. Do you wish to respond to what's just been stated?" Victoria didn't answer at first. She sat very still against the cart, staring at the small blinking light above her, at the old woman propped on the exam table, whose silence had somehow, impossibly, become the loudest thing in the entire building. "Say it louder for the judge watching this feed, Victoria," Janice said quietly. "You've had months to plan a story. Let's hear it." And something in Victoria finally broke all the way open. "You think I wanted this?" Her voice came out ragged, stripped of every ounce of the polish she'd worn like armor since the moment Yi-hoon had first walked into that foyer. "You think I woke up one day and decided to hurt an old woman for fun? I watched what this family does." "Yi-hoon, I watched federal agents circle your father for a decade before they finally got him. I watched what this life does to everyone who touches it, and I was supposed to just marry into that, raise children in it, wait for the day they took you too, and left me holding an empire built on things I can't even say out loud in a room with a camera in it." "So you decided to destroy my mother instead," Yi-hoon said, very quiet, very cold. "I decided to save what could be saved," Victoria said, and her voice cracked upward, desperate now, the words spilling faster than she seemed able to control. "The ports, the shipping contracts, all of it clean, legal, converted into something that couldn't be seized or burned down by the next war your father's enemies decide to start. I did it because his family is a disease that needed to be cleaned, Yi-hoon, and I was the only one willing to actually do something about it, instead of just watching it spread for another generation." The words hit the room like a physical blow, and even the compliance officer, trained to stay unreadable, went very still. "I was trying to save you," Victoria said, quieter now, and something in her voice had gone almost pleading, almost sincere, the last honest thing she would say in that room. From all of it, even if it meant she had to be moved somewhere safe, quiet, out of the way, so the transition could happen before anyone had time to fight it. She wasn't in your way because she was dangerous, Janice said softly, and there was no triumph in it, only something close to grief. She was in your way because she was the one person who could tell everyone the truth. That's not saving a family, Victoria. That's erasing a woman because her voice was inconvenient. Victoria had no answer for that. The compliance officer's radio crackled once, and he glanced down at a small tablet clipped to his belt, reading something quickly, his expression shifting into something final. "The presiding judge has reviewed the live feed in real time," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Based on the recorded statements and the confirmed forged documentation already flagged in this case file, the emergency transfer petition is revoked, effective immediately, and a warrant is being issued for the arrest of Victoria Vance on charges including elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and attempted unlawful confinement." On the small monitor mounted near the exam table, the same monitor that had displayed vitals and evaluation forms all morning, a new seal appeared, bold and official, the kind of digital stamp that made everything in that room instantly, permanently real. It flashed green. Transfer revoked. Victoria's whole body seemed to fold in on itself at the sight of it, all that careful architecture of composure finally gone for good, and when the second officer moved toward her with a set of restraints, she didn't fight it. She simply sat there, staring at the floor, at the syringe still lying harmless near the supply cart, at the woman in the maid's uniform kneeling beside a bed she'd once dismissed as beneath her notice. "Take her away," the compliance officer said. They lifted Victoria to her feet, and as they walked her past the exam table, past Isabella Choi sitting upright now with her son's hand still wrapped tightly around hers, the old woman's foot struck the floor one final time. A single, clear, deliberate tap, and this time nobody needed a board or a translation to understand exactly what it meant. "I see you, and I am still here." Victoria didn't look back, but at the doorway, just before the officers led her out into the corridor, she stopped for 1/2 second, turned her head toward Min-ho, still standing frozen by the wall, and said something low enough that only Janice, closest to the door, caught it. "You should have told me she still had another way to reach him." Janice's breath caught. Another way, not the piano, not the foot taps they'd already found. Something else. Before Janice could ask what she meant, the officers pulled Victoria forward and out into the hallway, her voice swallowed by the sound of radios and footsteps, and the door swung shut behind her, leaving the question hanging in the room with nowhere left to land. Yi-hoon didn't seem to have heard it. He was still kneeling beside his mother, forehead pressed to her good hand, his shoulders shaking with something he'd clearly been holding back since the foyer this morning, and Isabella's fingers moved gently through his hair the way, Janice imagined, they must have when he was small enough to still let her. Janice stood back and let them have the moment, but her mind kept circling that half-sentence, turning it over, unable to set it down. Another way to reach him. Whatever Victoria had meant by it, one thing was already clear. This house and this family weren't finished being unraveled yet. Victoria finally got exactly what's been coming to her all chapter, and if that gave you the chills of pure satisfaction, hit subscribe right now, because you do not want to miss what happens next. There's still a loose thread in this house that hasn't been pulled all the way yet, and what happens next is where it finally comes undone. The half-formed sentence stayed with Janice through the ride back to the estate, through the hours of statements taken by detectives in the estate's own study, through the sight of Dr. Ross being led out to a car with his medical bag, left behind on the counter where it would never be picked up again. And it was Min-ho, of all people, who finally answered it, sitting alone in the estate's kitchen under a security officer's watch, waiting for his own transport to the station. "She meant the household ledger," he said quietly, when Janice stopped in the doorway on her way past. "Isabella still signs off on staff payroll every month, has for 30 years, even after the stroke, thumbprint approval, through the accounting office. Victoria found out and worried it might be used to prove her mind was still sharp enough to run the estate's finances, which would have undercut the whole incapacity claim. That's the other way, she meant. Nothing more sinister than that. He looked down at his hands. I should have told someone the moment she asked me to help hide it. I told myself I was protecting my daughter. I was protecting myself. It wasn't a grand conspiracy. It was smaller than that, and somehow sadder, one more quiet proof that Isabella Choi had never once stopped being exactly who she'd always been, even while an entire household built a story insisting otherwise. Janice didn't offer him forgiveness. That wasn't hers to give. She simply nodded and left him there to wait for the officers who'd take him away, and walked back out into the late afternoon light spilling gold across the estate's marble floors. By evening, the house had gone quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in longer than anyone there could remember. Not the tense, watchful silence Janice had walked into that morning, but something settled, something closer to peace. Victoria was in custody, formally charged with fraud, elder abuse, forgery, and attempted unlawful confinement, her name already moving through the kind of circles that would make sure she never quietly disappeared into a plea deal. Dr. Ross had surrendered his license before the ink on his own confession had dried, cooperating fully in exchange for whatever leniency a judge might still be willing to offer a man who had, in the end, chosen his own preservation over an old woman's dignity right up until the moment there was nothing left to preserve. Minho's fate would be gentler, the prosecutors had indicated, given his cooperation and his testimony, gentler, though not gentle, because 14 years of trust didn't undo itself just because a man finally told the truth once it no longer served him to keep lying. Yi-hoon found Janice in the foyer, standing near the piano, the same piano that had rung out that single unexplained note hours earlier, its lid still open, its keys catching the last of the evening light. I had the deed transfer documents pulled from the vault, he said. The forged ones, I burned them myself in front of the family's legal counsel, so there could never be any question of them resurfacing somewhere down the line. He paused. The ports are secure. My mother's ownership stands exactly as it always did. Nothing Victoria touched will ever hold legal weight again. Good, Janice said simply. He turned to face her fully then, and something in his posture had changed since the morning, not the coiled readiness of a man walking into danger, but something quieter, more deliberate. I want to say something to you, and I want my mother to hear it too. He glanced toward the staircase, where Isabella sat in a chair someone had brought down for her, wrapped warm, watching them both with the same sharp, patient attention she'd carried through every hour of this impossible day. Yi-hoon knelt in front of Janice, the way he'd knelt in front of his mother that morning, and for a moment Janice thought he might actually take her hand, and then thought better of the assumption when he simply looked up at her instead, his voice unsteady in a way she hadn't heard from him even in the clinic. You saved my mother's life today, he said. When everyone in my world stood by and watched, my own household, men I trusted with my family's secrets for years, you were the only one who refused to look away. You put your career, your safety, everything you had on the line for a woman who wasn't even your blood. I don't know how a man repays something like that. I'm not sure it can be repaid, but I intend to try. He rose and turned to the small gathering of remaining staff who had assembled quietly near the hallway, drawn by some instinct that something important was happening in this room. Effective today, Yi-hoon said, his voice carrying the same authority Janice had first heard in the vault. Janice Everett is appointed Chief Protective Administrator of this estate, full oversight of my mother's care, her medical decisions, her household staff, and her personal well-being, answerable to no one in this house but her and to me. No physician enters this estate without her review. No document bearing my mother's signature leaves this property without her verification. No member of this staff will ever again be permitted to treat her voice as optional. He looked toward his mother, and something in his face broke open, gentle and unguarded. In this house, silence will never be mistaken for weakness again. Isabella's good hand rose, trembling slightly, and reached for Janice's, gripping it with a strength that surprised her, the way it had surprised her that morning when an old woman's foot had first tapped out a message nobody else in the house had thought to listen for. Janice knelt in front of her the way she used to kneel beside hospital beds, and found she couldn't speak for a moment, her throat too tight around everything this day had cost, and everything it had somehow, impossibly, given back. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for trusting me enough to listen for it." Isabella's foot tapped once against the floor. Yes. And then, unprompted, something new, a light, quick series of taps that Janice hadn't heard in that particular rhythm before, hesitant, almost shy, and Yi-hoon, watching, went suddenly very still, his eyes filling. "She's not tapping a warning," he said softly, his voice catching. "She's saying thank you." The room went quiet around them, the kind of quiet that holds instead of threatens, and somewhere in that stillness, the grand piano untouched again, its pedal fully released now, nothing left holding it down but the last vibration of a note struck hours earlier, let out one final, soft, resonant chime, clear and unhurried, fading slowly into the evening air like something finally allowed to rest. Outside, the estate's gate stood open in the gold light, no longer guarding secrets, no longer hiding what had been happening quietly behind them for months. Inside, a woman who had spent 8 months being told her voice no longer mattered sat surrounded by the people who had finally, fully, learned how to listen. And a maid who had once been stripped of everything she'd built her identity around stood in the center of that room not as staff, not as an afterthought, but as the reason any of them were still standing here at all. If you made it all the way to the end of this story with me, thank you. Truly. You stood by Janice through every locked door, every forged signature, every terrifying minute of that clinic showdown, and you gave this story the kind of love that makes telling it worth it. I hope watching Isabella finally get her voice back gave you even a fraction of the peace it gave me writing it. And if this story left something warm in your chest, I want to leave you with one more thing before you go. There's a 2-novel collection waiting for you called Stories That Make You Feel Something, one story that will break your heart, and one that will heal it right back up. Love, loss, hope, the kind of journeys that stay with you long after Janice and Yi-hoon's story fades from the screen. It comes with a free audiobook, future books included, and it's yours the instant you download it. Nothing to wait for, nothing to ship. The link is waiting in the description and pinned in the comments below. And if you're curled up watching this on your TV tonight, just grab your phone, open the camera, and scan the QR code right there on your screen. Go get it, settle in, and let another story hold you the way this one just did. Thank you for watching until the very last word.